Pirate Software is right about one specific thing. In his follow-up tweet to him trying to double down on the stop killing games and why he hates it so much, he says, movements like this showcase to me how little the general public understands about game development, modern gaming architecture, and online games as a whole. And he's right, most of the general public has never created a game. They don't understand the trials and tribulations of game development. Well, I figured to solve that problem, let's go ahead and chat with a game developer that might know a few things and could explain it to us, the general public. And so yesterday, I had the privilege of getting to interview Jack Vania, a game developer who will introduce himself shortly. And this was a very insightful and very interesting interview. And so in this interview, Jack pushes back on some of the points made by Pirate Software, offers solutions to the issues that he's brought up, but more broadly talks about the Stop Killing Games initiative from the perspective of a game developer who's ready to work with this initiative and make the changes that would need to be done to keep making games. And finally, before we jump into the interview, I'm just letting you know, check the pinned comment. It's going to be links to this guy's YouTube channel, as well as his Twitter, and I'm going to leave it in the description. So please go to his page, give him a subscribe, listen to what he has to say. Again, a very intelligent guy. But with all that out of the way, enjoy the interview. Thanks for hopping in for the stream. Just kind of introduce yourself and do a bit of chit chat, what you've done, that kind of thing.
My name is Jack Vania. I'm a video game developer. I've been in and out of the industry since about 2007. I started developing, though, I would say code in about 2014. And I say it that way because I wouldn't consider myself of working in the industry in like the front lines in terms of like development and stuff like that. I was just in and around since about 2007. So I don't really consider that like part of my resume because it would just be essentially padding it.
Sure.
But in terms of like development since about 2014, that's when I started. Programmer before that, doing other stuff, web, shit like that. Making some small games here and there. My main source of revenue in this was, you ever play a video game, whether it's made by a solo developer or like a 200 person studio and there's 1,000 people at the end of that list?
Yeah.
In the credits? I'm one of those 1,000 people. Okay. So what that means is like, we all have friends, all of us programmers, we're all friends with one another. Developers are all friends with one another. We all talk to one another. We all ask each other for help, like when we have a problem. And that just happened to be like the thing I did. So I'm somewhat of a generalist, not really a specialist, but I guess I'm like a specialist generalist, where if somebody can't figure something out or they have a problem to solve, they would call me. That's basically it. I've been working in and out. I've published a few different games on my own under different aliases, which I'm not going to talk about, but it was one of those things where lightning in a bottle the first time. Okay, that's totally cool. Let's see if I can do that again. Sort of lightning in a bottle. Number 3 was also sort of lightning in a bottle. I'm going to see if I do that one more time under this current pseudonym, Jack Vania. So we're going to see what happens with that. But I'm super duper interested actually to talk about this initiative here.
Yeah.
When it comes to Stop Killing Games, because I don't want to talk too much about Pirate because he's not here to defend himself or anything like that or give his point of view. He already did give his point of view. When I faced him on Twitter, I said my point of view, that was about it, but I'm not going to do it when he's not here. But we will talk about some of this stuff to kind of clear up the air, what I think. Technically wise, where I see he has problems.
If you don't mind. So the main thing that I was talking to Jack about before we started this was we're going to go through, the Stop Killing Games initiative, hear his perspective about it, as a game dev. But I did want to touch on, and this isn't to, drag Pirate Software or anything like that. It was just to touch on specifically a lot of his rhetoric surrounds, people that aren't in the industry, that aren't in the game development industry, don't understand how high, how high a bar it is to allow this initiative to go through and how that could impact specifically live service games, but game development as a whole. So that's like a big one that I want to touch on with you. But of course, when we're ready to do that, let's jump into it.
No, perfect. We'll start there, actually.
Okay.
So video games, if I could say, I'm sure private list too. Video games are incredibly difficult to make. That's not a lie. They're incredibly complex machines. You look at them, and this is one of the major problems I see with Pirate, and I see with a lot of other developers who might not have extensive experience working on multiple titles. This is the 30,000 foot view problem, where if you take a step back and you take a look at something like an MMO, it's this incredible machine of moving parts. There's whirring, clicking, buzzing, gears, levers, lights blinking, all sorts of stuff. And at 30,000 feet, it looks incredibly complex and difficult because it is. And it's a miracle these things ever actually even work. Like, it still blows my mind when I look at stuff like we're doing ray tracing and shit like that today, everything we're doing with AI. It blows my mind that any of this stuff actually works. But if we zoom in, we get a little bit of a different perspective. We don't see this gigantic like monstrosity. We see all the individual moving parts. We see the nuts and the bolts. Like, hey, look, this nut and this bolt are holding these two pieces together. This other nut and this bolt are holding these two pieces together. And then those two contraptions are being held together by another nut and a bolt. If you kind of understand what I'm saying, with simplifying it down to the core components, the base components is always going to be the best way to go. 30,000-foot view is not a good way to look at things or analyze things. It is in a macro sense, but a lot of the work that we do depends on the micro. So one of the big problems that I have, specifically with this industry, is this failure to move forward, failure to adapt to new things, and to just kind of do better. And what I mean by that is, I'm assuming Pirate is looking at this from a perspective of, this is going to be impossible to do today, with how we do things today, because he lacks the forward thinking to be like, okay, so we just need to change the way we do things going forward, which is the correct approach. Complexity isn't an engineering problem. Complexity is a brain compute problem. Slow down, space things out, and plan ahead. That is where the major pain points lie in development. It's not that things are complex. We can build complex anything. We have cars that drive themselves now, right? We set rockets into space, they land back down on the ground. Complexity is not an issue. That's not an engineering issue. That's a brain compute issue. So we need to change the way we do things and we author things in the future moving forward. And there's a lot of other pieces that will fall into place as we begin to do that. And development, I believe, will get easier over time if we do that now and still be better for the consumer than it actually is.
And so just kind of reiterate on that point. So when we're getting into talking about having to change a lot of the structure and how it exists now, you had mentioned in your kind of tweet responding to him that this is stuff that had been figured out like years ago, like truly years ago. And so you were specifying about multiplayer games. And so I'm a bit curious myself, because when it comes down to, they're talking about live service and, having ownership of servers given to people when they're killing off the game, like those kinds of ideas. Could you give me a bit more info as to, like, specifically when it comes to multiplayer games, how was that issue fixed? Like, how do you take care of that if we're to move forward?
Let's rewind a little bit to how things were done a super long time ago. I'll just glance over this part. A lot of older games would ship with multiple executables. You would have your client executable, which you would boot up for single player, and joining other games. And you have like a server executable. Some of you guys who are old as I am will probably remember that. Then later on, we started shipping kind of both as like an all-in-one peer-to-peer systems hosting, that kind of thing. And obviously that technology doesn't exist now. We can't use the same protocols. We can't use the same tools and everything as we did back then. But in terms of making kind of things future-proof and bringing that forward with multiplayer, so let's say we're making a game, and our game, it's Super Shoot in the Face 9000. It's the hottest new thing. Everybody's playing it, better than Call of Duty. Awesome. So we have this multiplayer component, and everybody's playing it. Everybody loves it, but we're going to sunset it because we decided that it's too expensive to keep the servers up and running. The first thing throughout development, if we were developing this correctly the right way, there's a few different ways to do it. Knowing that we had this kind of sunset clause, we could say, okay, so what are we using for server architecture? What does our server structure look like? Okay, so maybe we're using a little bit of Amazon, maybe something from Microsoft. There's authentication servers over here. This is where we store our data. And these are all individual pieces that are up in the cloud, quote unquote cloud. They're all working together to provide like a single, I would say server to the, colloquially that everyone identifies it as, that the player would then log on, the client would log on to play the game with everyone else. Well, maybe we just don't do that. At least not for the end user when we're going to sunset a game. Maybe we do something a little bit different. Maybe we build something alongside it separately and maintain it separately. Something that is small, something that is compact. Because one of the things here, an example, let me see if I could find it. I was taking a look at this, the Stop Killing Games website over here. This is underneath the fact, and I was reading through this and just kind of like taking some notes. But he's talking over here about example of an MMORPG, isn't it impossible for customers to run those when the servers are shut down? So this over here, he mentions not all will be this scalable, however, which is true. I mentioned this earlier about using these different services. Like you get Amazon, you got Microsoft, you have authentication servers, all sorts of different integrity checks, security, stuff like that. Sure, we can strip out a lot of that stuff because here it says, so if a server could originally support 5,000 people, but the end user version can only support 500, that's still a massive improvement from no one being able to play the game ever again. So what this tells me, my little note here is, this clearly implies that a one-to-one state is not expected, and an approximation is a reasonable enough solution. What that means is that it doesn't have to be exact. It can be an approximate of what the game was live. And we could do that. So we could build our game with, maybe we build it with some nicer APIs. I think I spoke about that on Twitter too. If nobody knows or understands what an API is, the simplest way is to say that I would like my glasses case and my pen. These are two individual applications. I would like them to talk to one another, but they can't because it's a pen and a glasses case. So I have to develop some kind of a protocol. You can call it a language, you can call it a set of rules so that they can exchange information back and forth without having access, without the glasses case having access to the ink, and without the pen having access to the glasses inside. So think about like Twitter, for example. Perfect example, social media. Now I'm going to guess at what their APIs are. I have no idea because I'm not signed up for them, nor do I really care for their APIs. But I'm assuming that if I were to sign up for their APIs and pay for them, I'd be able to do things like read a whole lot of data off of the website. I could probably write data to the website. I could probably have access to better search tools so that I could scrape data a little bit better, more analytics tools so that I could see more about posts. And on my end, I could write a program in something like Python to say, hey, look, I want to take all these users' posts from this one account. I want to save them all. And then I could have it parse out the post ID, the name, who this person was talking to, the text and the images, this, that, and the other. Parse out in JSON or XML or something like that. Perfect. Then I could take whatever I want with that data and do with it whatever I want. So I could create heat maps of who this individual likes talking to, who they most interact with, topics that they really like a lot, whatever I want with the data. The API would just let me talk to Twitter without having direct access to the database, without having direct access to the code from my little Python script that I wrote. That is effectively what an API does. It's also a form, it could be considered a form of abstraction in programming.
Yeah, to just give it a go. So it's taking something that, admittedly at a face value would be very difficult to kind of set up. Like, for instance, like you were saying, the ink in the pen and the glasses in the glasses case. And it's a protocol to set up and make that specific relationship. It allows it to happen in general, and it kind of just serves that function, and that's the goal of it, and it takes care of that specific job.
Yes, pretty much.
So then, to go forward with that, you'd be able to use that API. So if you're actually building a game with the understanding that, let's say, this Stop Killing Games initiative is in play, if you were to use that, that means that you could prep an API to set up and run the protocols that you need it to for when this gets to end of life.
Yeah, so you give those APIs to the end users so that they can create their own servers if they'd like. So super shoot you in the face 9000 could live on forever.
Right, and so it'd be a baby version of it, so you're not having to give up like everything. It's not doing something crazy like that. It's just like it's listed in the Stop Killing Games initiative, a functional playable game.
Exactly, a functional playable game.
Okay.
So we could do things like that with multiplayer games. MMOs are kind of a different beast because they obviously, I don't think I'd be able to handle thousands of people on my computer here at home. Who knows? But yeah, no. We plus, even if we just didn't even want to do that at all and just want to create like a small bespoke server, we could do that too. Or better yet, some games to help facilitate this kind of not even end of life, but just support for the game in general, have open sourced a lot of the tools that they've used for their servers, so that people can create their own solutions and actually contribute to the projects to keep things alive.
Yeah, perfect example. I mean, Gary's mod, Team Fortress 2, like these places have those open things. Now, admittedly, I do think about, the issue that has run in where Pirate Software is talking about, people monetizing that, like think like Minecraft, a lot of those servers, or like GTA 5, they have paid servers that you can join. I guess, where does that kind of run in? So maybe I'm a little uneducated, I might be jumping over, but I am aware that in some instances like this, to run those separate servers, it can be illegal. Like, what specifically about it makes it illegal? Is that the developer, publisher making it so, or is that...
I'm assuming, I'm not 100% up on law, but I'm assuming it would be copyright or IP, and there's be more notes about this too. Oh yes, this would be, where is it at here? Copyright. This is something I'm thinking about too, especially in regards to this movement, because a lot of people might be afraid that this is going to happen retroactively. It technically can, without developers having to do anything. And the way to do that would simply be to say, okay, so law, right? We've seen Blizzard go after private servers and stuff like that, especially specifically here in the United States. So imagine now if a game is sunset, it dies. The Crew, perfect example. And people want to bring it back. The 5 people that, on the last day when they played it, they want to make their own private server. But Ubisoft's like, no, you can't, because it's our IP. We could simply ask that the law say that once when you sunset a game, and once when you sunset the services for that game, that company, that developer, that publisher cannot go after private users for making their own solutions so that they can play the game, which would mean like private servers and things like that. That we could easily apply retroactively. So now Ubisoft wouldn't be able to go after anybody for the 5 people for trying to play the Crew, or the 3 people that are going to be playing our game, Super Shoot in the Face 9000 10 years from now.
That's the thing that has gotten to me the most out of any of this, because when I'm thinking about it, every time we talk about sunsetting a game and hitting that kill switch, that is the developer of the game, that is the publisher, accepting that they are not making money on this IP anymore. They have given up. They are fully pulling out. So at that point, why do they have a vested interest in what people choose to do with that, outside of, like, I can understand, if an IP has like they're setting up a franchise, or they're setting that up so they have an issue with like the branding itself being used, but in terms of the game itself just being played by the people that still enjoy it, I'm with you on that, where it just makes sense that could be instituted as some sort of law thing. But even then, the Stop Killing Games initiative is not focused on the retroactive aspect of it, but that is a really good example of a way that it could without any burden on developers.
I would not see that. I would not think that would be a burden at all. Like if I made a game or something like that would not be a burden, because that just seems normal to me. Like a car manufacturer is not going to be like, okay, we're shutting down your car now. It's been 3 years, the warranty's up, so you can't drive it anymore. Like, bro, it's working fine. Like, what are you doing? So also imagine this now, just the second and third order ramifications of that. If people know that they don't have the law hanging over their heads, ready to come down on them, they're going to be more inclined to work on a community solution. They're going to be more inclined to donate their time to create an open source server for something. And you're going to get a lot more people together and a lot more effort. There's something coming up too. People could scan my Twitter if they want at JackVaniaDev. I was talking with at JackVaniaDev. I was talking with Proton, the Proton Mail and all those guys and stuff like that. I've been on them guys forever for a Proton Drive version of Linux that will be coming. You're welcome, everybody. My incessant memes throwing memes at them. I guess lit a fire underneath them. But hopefully I'll be able to talk more about that. But that is also another example of the open source community coming together and just being like, hey, look, we're itching. Just give us anything to help us. We'll do this for you. Just give us anything. And after enough pressure, we finally did it. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. Admittedly, not enough of a PC head to understand Proton, like a dry version of Linux, but that sounds awesome, especially for like open source stuff. I know that is a huge deal. So congrats on actually working with them and using memes to to achieve the ends. That's awesome.
They threw all the memes out of my head. It took a while, but we wore them down.
There we go. Well, okay. So the other the last thing I want to touch on with Pirate, just like one of the conversations he had, and then we can get over to like some of the other like Q&A parts of this. He had mentioned this scenario where people will intentionally essentially like kill a game. They'll force, through, this negativity, bots, etc. Like he referenced Team Fortress 2 doing something similar to get to a place where now they can force the initiative to essentially give them the information for free, get a server set up, and then they could monetize that server for other people that are going to be playing that game. Is this something you were familiar with? Like, had you heard about this scenario? I don't want to, have you extrapolate on it if you don't know much about it.
I've heard about the scenario, but as soon as you put something out there, you run a YouTube channel, you know how it goes. As soon as you put something out there, it's a vector for attack.
Right.
You know what I mean? And whether this doesn't have to be anything. Like we've seen people attack video game companies, like you mentioned with Team Fortress and stuff like that. Like the vector of attack is always going to be open. It's always going to be there. That's almost a non-starter argument for me because it's like saying, well, what about piracy? The people are going to pirate no matter what. Like, I cannot stand DRM. I hate DRM. I refuse to buy games that have DRM on it. In my game, the one I'm working on right now, there's Steam integration. Steam integration only goes as far as like achievements, rich presence and stuff like that inside the game.
For those who don't know, could you like briefly DRM?
DRM's digital rights management. It's basically a check that the checks may be different, right? So it could be a code that you have to put in. It could be a disk that you have to put in your drive. They used to be like that back in the day. Used to have a disk and a drive in order to play the game. But now they're mostly like online checks and stuff like that, authentication checks to make sure that you actually own the game. And that's basically a way of preventing a user from playing a game unless the game phones home to some server somewhere.
Sure. So think like Helldivers would be a good example. Just like a lot of people were upset about Sony. You had to make an account for, I think it was Sony, to connect to the servers. Now they do it for a variety of other reasons at this point, but I would say that's a comparable, like that is essentially what you're doing. You have to connect online to play the game.
Yeah. Or it could be something simple too, like through Steam's APIs. What I could do is I could simply say that when the user launches this game, like if they launch it from the folder and Steam's not running, I could just simply say that if Steam is not running, launch Steam. If Steam connects and it connects to the internet, then just check to see if this application ID is in the user's inventory, if they own the game or not. And that could be also a form of DRM as well. But that's what I was saying. Like I avoid doing that with my game. So when I do my check for Steam, you could launch the game in or out of Steam. It doesn't matter. So when I do my check for Steam, I just basically look to see if Steam is running. If Steam is running, I'll hook in through Steam's API so the user can get Steam achievements, rich presence, whatever else, there's no leaderboards for my game, but all the Steam features that they would expect in the game. If Steam is not running or they're offline, nothing happens. There's no phoning home. There's no nothing because it's just a simple flag. It just checks once every time you start up the game. It doesn't even check to see if you own the game. It just checks to see if Steam is running, which is interesting too. Because I feel that's an acceptable kind of like a trade-off. If you are running Steam, the game can hook in for that kind of stuff. If you want a clean version, I was also considering doing like a clean version, putting it in a separate build that doesn't contain any APIs for Steam or anything. Then they could just select that one, download it, zip it up into a file somewhere, and put it on their drive for safekeeping.
Right, but even then, we're talking about appeasement for like a DRM that's just a bit more clean, and we don't have to worry about grabbing data and all this, bullshit that ends up coming along with, the argument about hating it. For Helldivers was a great example, but I appreciate that. I'm glad that there's also like, briefly, I understand that, but even just how you explained it there with the DRM using Steam, like that, it's a great thing, because at the end of the day, it shouldn't be a be-all catch-all net, because people will find a way to torrent. It's just, that's an inevitability. Like, piracy is always going to be around. Matter of fact, it's recently been on an uptick. But digressing from the point, back to stop killing games. So were there any specific points within the FAQ, I've pulled it back up, that you wanted to like focus in on for this interview?
Let's take a look at some of these. The first three over here, I think this is more like law or ideology kind of stuff, right? How are publishers destroying video games? Well, that's subjective. Why would you care about publishers destroying video games? Again, subjective. But let's look at some of the technical stuff. Aren't you asking companies to support games forever? Isn't that unrealistic? It says here, no, we're not asking for that at all. We're in favor of publishers ending support for a game whenever they choose. Blah, blah, that's great. Modify or patch the game so that it could run on customer systems with no further support from the company being necessary. Again, that could be something as simple as just if the game had an online requirement check for whatever reason before, just don't do it. We see that with the Souls games, right? Souls games are online. You can play the game in offline mode too. When the servers went down, people can still play the single player portion of the game. It just doesn't connect online. That's it. So you can still launch it and you can play it in offline mode. For like single player games and stuff like that, those are easy solutions. For multiplayer, it could be as simple as, okay, this was a multiplayer game. Maybe the solution, the approximation, instead of connecting to dedicated servers with matchmaking and this, that, and the other, maybe the approximation is just allowing friends to connect peer-to-peer or over LAN. Maybe it's that simple. Other multiplayer games also can, again, like I was speaking about, like APIs and stuff like that. Even so, like server binaries is something that I've heard a lot of people mention too. You might have to give out server binaries and their security issues and this, and they're sure.
So server binaries, for like layman's terms, for those who don't know,
the source code that runs everything.
So in the source code that runs everything, the reason that people have an issue with that, why would a publisher or developer have an issue with, giving those server binaries to other people?
To maybe trade secrets, specifically when it comes to like handling security, integrity checks, like that kind of thing, to make sure that that is always hidden away from the player. But at the same time, there's always going to be people trying to hack, reverse engineer, decompile, do all that kinds of stuff. So that is also a little bit, it's important. Security is important. Obviously, data integrity, great. That's very, very important too. APIs can also help handle that as well. Getting a server binary, maybe you just create a different server binary. Like I said, you have your larger one that like I explained earlier, that uses like Amazon services and Microsoft and whatever else, and using third-party services for security, authentication, all that other junk. But maybe just build a smaller one that a user could run on their own machine that doesn't have to worry about any of that. It's almost like a la carte. Like you pull all of those bigger elements out and create something that is a little bit smaller. But because you built your game around using an API system to talk to the servers, you could use that same API system to then hook into that little mini server that any end user could run.
Okay, so I think you might have just answered my question. So I was going to follow up then with, if you had to create a second separate server binary, doesn't that kind of, run the risk of that ending up being a lot of workload? But you're saying that you can just kind of almost scrap the second binary up and make sure that you're removing all of the, quote unquote trade secrets or the important bits, and use those to run that secondary, functional playable game after, you're sunsetting it.
Yeah. So if you did, you can develop both side by side. So let me give an example now of something with like an API. So we like, let's say we're given nothing. We have no binary. We have nothing. We have nothing except APIs. So we're looking through all the data sheets, the documentation and stuff like that the developer gave us, or that we give out to everybody for Super Shoot Interface 9000. And one of the items is, one of the API calls might be send transform. And you look at it and be like, send transform parentheses transform. Like, what the hell is this? And maybe like an identifier for the character, the actor, the object that the transform it is. So transform data is basically an object's position, rotation, and scale inside of a game world. That's all transform data is. So you have to get your vector, which puts your position in three-dimensional space, the scale of the object, and the rotation of the object, which way is looking at all that. So now we could say, okay, well, shit, that sounds like, so we're sending transform data to the server. So what are we going to do now if we're custom making a server? Okay, so we have to take that data, interpret that data somehow, whatever, to break it down into 3 individual vectors. Then we're going to look and be like, okay, maybe we can do an integrity check. However we want to do integrity checks to make sure the guy's not teleporting all around the screen or all around the map to make sure they're not cheating. What else do we have to do with that data now? Well, we have to make sure that all the other clients that are connected know to have that transform data as well, so they know that other players' position, rotation, and scale in the game world. So we just solved one problem. That's one nut and bolt. Like I was talking about earlier, there's one nut and bolt. Now take a look at the rest of the documentation, look at all the other stuff that is attached and that those APIs could do, and we can then continue to construct our homemade server. I believe probably something like there was a whole lot of data interception with like the Nostalgius team when they were making like all like the private WoW servers and stuff like that. I don't know entirely how they made it all, but I'm assuming it was a whole lot of data capture, taking a look at the data that was being handed back and forth between, let's say, like an original client and a modern day server, kind of walking it backwards from there, looking at the client, seeing what the client is asking for, outbound checks when it tries connecting to servers, and then slowly just kind of like building backwards from there, basically trying to answer questions that the client is asking correctly. But if we have the APIs, we almost don't need to try to figure out what the information the client is looking for, because most of the times APIs are named fairly clearly. And if we have a list and a documentation of all of them, we can kind of figure out what everything is and then reverse engineer our own server from there.
It's kind of just like organizing the wires in a proper way to make it easier to understand all of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I being too verbose?
No, I'll ask you when we need to like clarify, and like some of this I'll chop out for like a video that I'll make of it. In essence, what you're talking about here, it kind of sounded like most specifically that was tackling kind of the argument about, issues with like MOBAs or things that where they need to send it to the server to verify, like you were talking about those transformer files where we need to know that these people are here and we don't want, them to know where the other people are, like Fog of War, things like that for like League of Legends. So this would kind of be like almost a specific instance of how this would be remedied when it comes to like one of those MOBAs and how you deal with, allowing that to be more so client side with these APIs.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. I think that's understandable. I'm glad you covered that because that was something that I was curious about and I'd forgotten to ask. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Another thing here, isn't it impractical, if not possible, to make online-only multiplayer games work without company servers? Not at all. Again, true. Like we just talked about this a little bit. If a company has designed a game with no thought given towards the possibility of letting users run the game without their support, then yes, this can be a challenging goal to transition to. Complexity is not a problem where planning is. Like I was talking to you earlier about 30,000 foot view. Complexity. When you're looking at the big thing, it looks big and it looks scary. But as soon as you drill down into it, there are all these little nuts and bolts. And yes, it takes time, a whole lot of time. But again, a lot of the scariness of this idea and of this initiative comes from the fact that a lot of developers can't get past thinking about how we do things today. They can't think forward, second and third order thinking. Like the perfect example. Let's skip down here to, he was talking about some license agreements with like third parties and stuff, because there might be some third party software or tools or even intellectual properties too, right? Like you've got guest stars in your video game from these other video games that are coming in, but maybe those are only like timed exclusivity. So it says here, aren't companies unable to do this due to license agreements they make with their other companies that expire, like with music, other software, product brands, etc. So partially true, but some third party tools and services expire. However, the problem is not that it can't be done. It is that these companies that provide these services would have to adapt to new laws or just not make money because the dev will simply choose to pay a vendor that adheres to the law. So if somebody's going to say that, hey, we got this tool that we're using, this authentication service that we're using, this tool, maybe an open source solution is the answer then. There's maybe a third party vendor is going to come up with a solution that says, yes, you could buy the use of our characters in your video game indefinitely. You just can't once when you sunset the game, you can't sell new copies, but everyone that had the copies before, we have to adhere with law. They're still allowed to use it.
Right. Yeah. It's just the free market is going to do what the free market's going to do. Like someone will come in and fill those shoes. And again, just like exactly what you're saying, it's not about, how we're making things now. We're making things now because those are falling in line with the letter of the law now. And if that is to change, the market's going to adapt because there is money in gaming in every shape and form, no matter what.
Right. Adapting slowly is going to be the best way to go too.
Right.
I mean, so if this were to ever get enacted, like I said, I don't imagine this to be like, well, next week, guess what? Every game that launches after July 4th has to, no. This will probably be like 5 years down the line. And I firmly believe in 5 years, if you can't figure this out, you should probably just get out of game development entirely. Because these are, again, complexity is not an unsolvable problem. It's not an engineering issue. It's just a planning issue.
So then again with that, I think it's even mentioned actually in the FAQ about when this would be going through. I think there's a question about retroactive. Does this does this apply to everything or is it retroactive?
Yeah, there was something about it, whether or not this will apply retroactively. The answer to that is no.
He talked about it in his video as well. He said that, no, this would be a down the road thing, as most policy ends up doing. Like you usually hear, okay, well, the start date for this, or like, for example, the legalization of marijuana. It's always you hear about it and then they say, hey, by the way, this is going to start off in like 6 months to a year before it's actually like gone through. I don't think that that's a crazy leap to assume that this would also be doing the same thing. And you don't really even need to assume it because he talks about it in his video.
That's an incredibly important point. That is, I believe that is way more than enough time to handle things. But one of the things I think about too, which I know this scares, I believe, AAA more than it scares anybody else, because AAA are these big behemoths I don't know if you guys ever read my tweet. I have some very nice things to say about AAA. I said, what did I say? They're run by smooth brain shit sacks, which is true. No, think about it. So AAA has a problem where they believe that the way they solve things is with money and bodies. And it's not the best way to do things all the time, because more bodies doesn't mean more throughput. So if I have a 6-person studio, let's say I have a 6-person studio, and I double that amount to 12, I might be able to double the output of what I'm able to produce. Sure, because we're going from 6 to 12. But the bigger because that's still a very, very small team size, we're still going to be incredibly agile. But if I have 150 people and I double that to 300, that output is maybe only going to increase by 20, 25%, 30 if they are incredibly lucky.
Isn't that it's like a theory of general work, like in a work setting, that it's about 10% of the people are doing 90% of the work, so on and so forth?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the more you add to that pile, the less and less you're going to get out of it.
Wait, so you're saying that, a video game that has a $300 million budget, that doesn't mean that the game's just inherently going to be good?
No, not at all.
Dude, no way. Shareholders are going to be pissed about this.
But that's how a lot of these big studios think. But to just take a look at it, you had, what was the game recently? Was it Dragon Age: The Veilguard? It started life as single player, then it went multiplayer, then went back to single player in like a 6-year span. There's something insane. Like, who makes these decisions? They should be immediately fired. 100%. Oh, I'm not joking. They need to be immediately fired, because that is piss poor planning. So I wrote about this too on our website. So I also run a show. We put out a couple of videos a week, and we interview other developers and stuff like that. It's called Industry Dev. So there is a part where I talk in one of the articles that I had written about it, where I talk about everyone at AAA, like all the bean counters and everything. They love data. They love looking at data and not results. It's a form of suicidal empathy, or is it suicidal empathy or bias? What is it? Oh no, survivor buyership. That's what it is. Survivor bias. Survivor bias. It's saying that, hey, I survived something once that 1 million other people die from. You'll be fine the next time. Don't worry about it. So what a lot of these studios do is they see something that, because a lot of people have been just, you gamers, myself included, for a long time. I stopped doing this. We're just kind of eating things up, because it's just like, well, this is what they're giving us. I guess we'll just have to pay for it. And I guess we're stuck with it. Then indies come around. And slowly over the past decade, they just been pulling numbers. They've been cooking like crazy. Like nonstop. Like, they are 100% in charge of the industry right now in terms of quality, in terms of ideas, in terms of pushing the envelope, 100%. And now AAA has a problem. Now survivorship bias is biting them in the ass. What was working for them before, because there was no other competition that was trying to invade that space, isn't working anymore, because people are realizing that indies are just making flat out better games nowadays. Not all, right? But yeah, no, so I see AAA business being run horribly. So they spend a gratuitous amount of money. They hire way too many people to make these games. And granted, I know technology is expensive to create and stuff like that, and that's fine. But they also want everything, and they also want everything now as fast as possible.
And to bring that more home, and more, those are the people that are pushing the hardest against something like this, because that ends up 100%. Being, you have to make incredible changes that is going to impact how they've been trying to do stuff for the last, I don't know, decade or two at this point.
And that's why this push for live service games, especially from Sony too, like they wanted to make like everything a live service game. Like all their projects are crashing and burning, thankfully. It's not that I don't like Sony. I used to love them like crazy, PS2 days, but like, man, they just went off the rails. But so we see a lot more business models moving towards like live service games. Like Fortnite's been around forever, for example. All these companies, developers, publishers are trying to push a lot more like of these live service games. I'm starting to repeat myself here, but it's because they want a continuous revenue source, and they want a continuous revenue stream, as well as suck the oxygen out of the room, because they want to keep you invested in a product. They want to keep you playing that product, and they don't want to leave any room for you to go anywhere else. So they have you buy lots of stuff in their video game, invest tons of time in their video game. So you develop almost like an attachment to it, because you got a lot of hours in the video game, you got a lot of stuff, you bought a lot of microtransactions. Like, what are you gonna do if you stop playing that game? All of that money you spent is now gone.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what is that called? So, I know what you're talking about. Sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, a lot of this is also psychological too, and based on what I would consider like a dark economic pattern.
Yeah, I think I recently looked into something about how, I mean, in the EU, they were trying to change microtransactions in game, to change like currencies in game to being a direct match, like removing those entirely or having them be a direct match to stuff. Diablo 4 was referenced in it. So I totally get what you're talking about there. For the sake of bringing it back to the Stop Killing Games initiative.
I think we're talking about like third-party services and then that kind of flow.
Oh, okay, yes. So they're using those third-party services, like Crew again, if we're going back to that really great example of having the cars, that they were licensed. Well, actually, no, we kind of touched on that. At this point, it's just that's going to have to change. That format, someone is going to license it. for the entirety of the game duration, and the people that aren't are going to get, they're going to lose or they're going to change.
Yeah, developers just going to hang up the phone and be like, okay, if you're not compliant, I don't buy it from you, and that's it.
Right.
And that part of the market's going to correct itself. I firmly believe, because we've seen other parts of the market correct themselves too. Like I know a couple of other developers have brought up the GDPR and all the privacy stuff and the EU and stuff. Oh, they said all the same things. It's gonna kill innovation. It's gonna break down all the current products that we use and stuff like it. No, it didn't.
What was the GDPR?
GDPR is like all the privacy stuff that went on in Europe with data collection and stuff. All these different companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter and everybody else collecting just copious amounts of data on everybody. And there was a law that said that users had to opt into, I believe it was like user had to opt into a lot of the stuff. Or
it's like the cookie thing?
To make it easy to have all your data removed within like a incredibly short amount of time upon request. Stuff like that, right? Just totally privacy focused for the benefit of the end user. Everybody thought the industries would crash and burn. It never happened, because the people that were telling you were going to crash and burn were the people at the top that had all the money to do it. It's like studies, right? You read a study about whatever it is, then you go, oh, this thing is so awesome. This is the best bottle you'll ever buy in your whole entire life, and because it looks cool. And then the study was made by the company that made the bottle.
Right.
Let's take out this question. Would you be forcing, or what you're asking, force the company to give up its intellectual property rights? Isn't that unreasonable? The answer says no, we would not require the company to give up any of its intellectual property rights, only allow players to continue running the game that they purchased. In no way would that involve the publisher forfeiting any intellectual property rights. To which my note here, like we spoke about earlier, this can simply be handled by publishers agreeing to not pursue copyright or IP infringement for things like community-created private servers. This benefit will carry over to more users being part of the creation and open source process of a community-created servers and services without the fear of law hanging over their heads. Okay. I think it's a huge benefit. So like I'm a Linux man. I use Linux on the daily. I even build my Windows executables on Linux. Then I have a separate Windows machine that I use to test all my stuff out on. And Linux is open source. There's nothing wrong with Blender. I'm sure you're familiar with Blender 3D. Amazing application, open source. Open source community can do some shit.
Yeah.
Like full stop, man. They got hands.
Real quick. So for that too, I think a lot of people run into the issue where they see something like that. It's like, no, we just want the game playable. In no way would that involve a publisher forfeiting any intellectual property rights. So it ends up being this thing where it's like, okay, so we're saying that, no, you don't have to do that. But then the argument back is going to be, well, there's like an obligation for us that we're going to need to do that in this sense, where it ends up just being that realistically, if they want to avoid that, because there's, legitimate reasons that there's laws in place of, not violating those intellectual property rights, they do need to figure out a different way to handle it. And it's not, it's more so on them to figure that out, which is, people will look at it and go, oh, you're kind of screwing them. But at the same point, no, it's actually incredibly, like, you have much more of a degree of freedom in terms of how you're going to deal with that as a developer, as opposed to us directly, like with the initiative, giving you a direct, order for how you would handle dealing with this.
There's a lot that's going to have to change moving forward. You said it right. There's a lot that's going to have to change moving forward. Timing is going to be the best thing. Like I keep on saying this because I try to hammer this home to any developer that asks me, like, do I have any advice? The 35,000 problem, that view, the complexity, that's not an engineering problem. It never is. Just drill on closer. And planning ahead is going to be the best thing. And in terms of stuff like this, I think you hit the nail on the head 100%. Laws will have to change. Other parties, like third parties and stuff like that, they'll have to kind of hop on board and get in line if they want to continue to make money. I think they will do that. Let's tackle this one. How about this? It's not in here at all because this is just purely speculation. The idea that it will kill innovation and it will stop people from creating and making games. Do we think that's the case?
Well, I think a better question is like, why are people assuming that would be the case given this initiative? Like, what is the main focal point for why that would destroy it?
I don't know.
Well, coming from game dev, that's pretty important. I don't know.
No, it's just I do not think it would destroy it at all. It would be almost so. It's all in the way you do things. It's all in the way you plan things out. This idea that it's going to destroy innovation, that's going to stop people from making, well, I'm assuming maybe depending on your budget, if you're like an indie developer, you don't really have that big of a budget, you're probably not going to be making a massive MMO where you expect thousands of people to be playing because you're not going to be able to pay for that kind of server infrastructure. Same thing with live services titles.
But that's the expectation out the gate. There's no indie developer that is single-handedly trying to tackle a MMO to that scale.
Right. Again, I keep on going back to planning because this is going to be the most important aspect of it all. Planning is going to allow you to continue making the games that you want to make. It's not this initiative. I do not believe will interfere with anything. People will still be able to have to make their any kind of live service games that they want. Their MMOs, everything all stays the same. I don't see how this would affect it at all. With careful planning, obviously you're going to be using new tools. You're going to moving forward. You're going to restructure how you do things. But that's another thing too, if you really think about it, because technology is changing all the time. We're constantly having to change the protocols that we use, securities, especially when it comes to security. Perfect example. That's constantly changing. We're constantly moving. We're constantly having to update and the way we do things to make sure that data integrity, that the servers are okay, that nobody's getting hacked when they're on our servers, stuff like that, this, that, and the other. That's always going to be a thing. We're always going to be doing that. Servers will always require maintenance. Code will always need to be updated. But we could just do this alongside slowly making these changes so we could become compliant with some kind of an end of life plan to either, like I said, either allow some kind of approximation of a server that could run on somebody's computer that obviously maybe can't hold thousands of players, but well, maybe a 32-player lobby that could probably work too, right? Because a lot of there are some shooters that run peer-to-peer that have large lobbies and stuff like that too, right? Like that's not a big deal. Matchmaking servers, of course, but everyone still connects to somebody else's machine. So there's ways that we could do this, that we've had solutions before in the past that we still use and do now. And peer-to-peer is a perfect example of it too. If you want to do something like that, I mean, granted, you're not going to rebalance an entire MMO around, a 5-man party unless your MMO is designed for 5-man. But nor is anybody asking anybody to.
Yeah.
Like that would be a case. That would be in MMOs, I believe, would probably be the extreme case where it would be like, okay, just don't come after anybody when they start messing, creating private servers. Don't come after anybody for IP infringements or copyright or this.
Because you can give them the opportunity to scale the game to how they like. Because at the end of the day, they're playing a game that the developers thought, it's time to sunset. So at that point, they're doing what they'd like with a game that they clearly love, that they're playing, years after. I also just I think it's always important to remind that physical copies. That is what the original setup was for video games in general. Yes, we're mainly focused on the multiplayer because I think that's the most there's more of a conversation to be had. But you were talking about PlayStation 2. I was playing Lego Star Wars with my brothers, when I was 7 years old, and that still runs today, albeit, need to make sure the copy isn't scratched to shit. But the games were given to you with the expectation that you were going to play it as long as you could function the console that you had. And so there wasn't, a kill switch. And, maybe it's like Medal of Honor, maybe the official servers are down and, et cetera. I could go on. And that was kind of when I read your tweet, because I was going through it and I saw your response to Pirate. Is you're right. 20 years ago, this was figured out. Because I remember, and I can look at all the games that I was playing as a kid growing up going, I could still, if I had the console, I could still whip out and play them today. And, you weren't even thinking about a end of life care, quote unquote. That's just the expectation was it was a purchase, you got the product, and it wasn't going to be taken away from you at another point. Yeah,
100%. Speaking of old stuff.
What is
NES right there.
Oh,
NES.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Some cards up there. I've got DOS boxes up here. I could run under DOS box. I've got a 3.5 floppy that plugs in the USB because obviously we don't have anything inside of our PCs anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I play DOS games, stuff like that too. So all these things were sold to the end user with the expectation that if they could run it, if they didn't break, they didn't throw it away, do all that stuff. That's fine. Oh, which reminds us, let's talk about microtransactions. How about that? That's something too, right? I did kind of cover that somewhere here. Microtransactions in a that was covered in the free to play games. I think you had something up here.
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah.
So isn't it unreasonable to ask this of free-to-play games? The answer, while free-to-play games are free for users to try, they're supportive of microtransactions, which customers spend money on. When a publisher ends a free-to-play game without providing any recourse to the players, they're effectively robbing those that bought the features of the game. I agree. Hence, they should be accountable to making the game playable in some fashion when support ends. Our proposed regulations would have no impact on non-commercial games that are 100% free, however. I think I put it in here. In terms of microtransactions, we can create solutions. And this is just off the top of my head. I think I mentioned this in your video. We can create solutions to carry over purchases with signed keys, right? A file that the game will create and place on the user's desktop on a computer, wherever the user wants it, and says, this is the key that you use. It's almost like your password backups for your apps and stuff like that. Here's the key that you will use to unlock all the microtransactions that you purchased inside of a game when these servers go down. So next time you launch the game, you're launching in an offline mode. And if you want to have access to everything that you bought, you have this key. Now, if I do this and I say, hey, look, okay, here's this key. You have this key. You could take this key and you could put it on your NAS, your 8 terabyte NAS, and you could duplicate it so it fills up all 8 terabytes. Or you could take that key, throw it in the fucking recycle bin and hit recycle. I don't care. I kept up my end of the bargain, which is allowing you to have your microtransactions after the fact. So there's ways to solve this too, but ultimately, like I said on Twitter, I do believe that microtransactions are a design problem and not a fucking end of life problem, right? Okay. It's not a stop killing games problem.
To shoot the shit on that point, so would you say that there's a potential argument there that if you are just allowed to do whatever, make copies of it, send it to people, does that not illegitimize the purchases themselves?
If it was encrypted in some way to only work with the copy of your game that you had, that might be something.
Well, there you go. Okay. And I feel at that point, once you sunset it, you've officially kind of, I would say, thrown in the reins about, making money off of it. So at that point, it doesn't really matter if people go to town. It's just more of like well, I feel shitty now because I could have just waited a decade, not bought the game.
People may reverse engineer anyway and try to hack and do all that other stuff with it, and I'm sure people will, right? So let's face it, this is the internet we're talking about. They will do anything. Bro tip: if you're a developer, watch streamers try to play your game, watch let's plays, and do all that other stuff, so you could watch how people love breaking video games, so you know what to protect against. Okay, wouldn't this be a security risk for video game companies? I don't think we covered that one. The answer says here, not at all. In asking for a game to be operable, we're not demanding that all internal code and documentation, just a functional copy of the game, would be no more of a security risk than selling the game in the first place. I said this could simply means giving the community an API so they could create their own private server. No server binaries released to the clients already. So a lot of these solutions that we already talked about and described could be applied also to here. Yeah, and also like if there's some kind of a weird trade secret that you have about the netcode in your game, which there probably isn't. So in case people don't know, the word trade secret, like when we're talking about like super secret code, right? Like companies have sued each other over trade secrets. I think John Carmack was involved in something when he went from one VR company to another. They said that he took some of the code with him. The whole thing I don't like about like trademarks and patents and all that other stuff on things like code when it comes to technology is I'm a firm believer that code should be free, number one. Number two, being able to trademark, copyright, or basically protect a method is important to a point. When it comes to code, thankfully, though, there's always usually a million ways to solve a problem. But let me give you an example. So if I work in Unity Engine or Unreal Engine, and I'm creating a system for an RPG that handles calculating damage based on any number of stats like the weapon, the armor type, right, resistances, rolls, whatever, critical, all that other stuff. I might use a different language to write it in Godot, but functionally, it's going to be the exact same. I'm going to be using the same methods to do everything. I'm going to be using the same math to do everything. Like all the idea, all the logic that makes a video game is all going to be there. It's kind of hard to say that there are actually trade secrets when it comes to programming, because programming, you only have a limited set of things that you could do with any one programming language, and you can only put them together so many ways and have it actually work. It's like Legos. There's not an infinite amount of Legos, but there's almost an infinite amount of possibilities in how you could build those things. And naturally, you take two people, ask them to build something, and eventually they might build the exact same thing in the exact same way because that might be the most efficient way to do it. So I'm really against this idea that you could like trademark code and like secrets and stuff like that, like trade secrets. I'm really against that idea. I believe that code should be free, which is why I love a lot of open source software and stuff. That's kind of my view on that whole thing. The biggest risk would probably be like some kind of a security risk for the end user if they're, but I mean, this is kind of internet 101, like don't go to bad websites, don't click on links and emails, like that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right. You have that expectation that, especially like think about old Call of Duties. Like I actually want to jump to Modern Warfare 3 as well as Black Ops 2. So there was a thing, this thing called Plutonium, and it was the service that was set up essentially to allow people to play these games again. And Plutonium was and I'm probably going to butcher this, but they essentially were hosting servers and allowing people to play the game again with a better chance of not running into hackers, things like this, because as it stood, the Black Ops 2 servers that were running and the MW3 ones that were running were not being managed and maintained. They existed, but that meant that people could like actually really do some damage to you potentially. Like they could really get into your computer because they were not maintaining them. And so Plutonium, they got canceled down. They got brought down at one point by the publishers, which is, again, I argue bullshit. But they were trying to fix that because inevitably you do run the risk once you understand that a developer sunsets a game, that you are going to run the risk that because they're not managing and maintaining it at the security level that they were when they were, taking care of and paying for it, you're going to run into that. That's kind of like it's just internet knowledge,
And then you also, because of that, we're going to start forming groups that have trusted sources that they trust that take care of their stuff, right? It's no different than going back in the day and logging out of other people's private servers. Like if you're playing whatever the hell game, like Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, or doing something, you're logging out of somebody's server somewhere, right? The servers that are good. You know the servers that are not. You know the servers to avoid. Even if they just because they got assholes on them, and you don't like the managers or whoever the fuck.
Oh, you're just running into the same thing as like, figuring out what a scam website is, or figuring out like this download now box here. Although admittedly, 12-year-old Quintheo is like, hell yeah, give me the free whatever the hell, and then like completely bricking my dad's computer. Yeah. You have to. I think that's just internet literacy, and I feel like that ends up. People are turning it into something that it isn't.
I don't think that is something that developer needs to worry about or handle. I don't see that security issues addressed here because I think it's just implied that an approximation, like I was talking about earlier when it comes to approximations, I think approximations is going to be good enough. And I think that goes along for security too. Right. And I think people could be smart. Well, I shouldn't fucking say that. Yeah,
careful.
I think people are smart enough to figure that. Oh no, maybe not.
Does the wording European need to be more specific? Oh, I don't. You're not much of a logger yourself. I think just to like jump in and say that, I think he was specifically talking about. Well, this is initiative. Like
Right.
this is essentially getting in a foot in the door to have a conversation, to start having these compromises with these huge giants that are in the gaming industry, the people that are taking care of this, and actually starting to get to a place where we can initiate this, because at the end of the day, it's for consumers, and of course there's going to be pushback. So trying to be appealing in any way, shape, or form by leaving it vague and allowing them to have the opportunity to say, okay, well, we'll tackle this issue this way, but still enabling it so that at the end of the day, you still get to keep the game even when they're done with it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that this
Sorry,
whole
I'm
thing.
interviewing you. I'm sorry.
No, right? No, it's fine. I think this whole thing, I think is a very good initiative. Developers obviously have to come to the table. They're going to be lobbying. They're all the representatives, whoever they need to lobby. They're going to be paying whoever they can. If this ever were to go anywhere, and so they're going to have a chance to speak their mind too, and hopefully they do it in a good and honest way. There's not a whole lot that I would request out of this initiative personally. Like if I had any qualms with it, I don't think I'd even want to clarify anything else. Like there's enough in here, like there's multiple spots in here, and I keep on bringing this up because it's critically important for something like this to succeed and not be a burden on every single dev. Is stuff like this where I talk about an approximation. It's close enough. It's reasonable enough. Is a reasonable enough expectation to say this is close enough and good enough? Because everyone needs to understand that you're not going to be running around with thousands of other people on your own little private server that you're running inside your home. On your home computer, if it's something like an MMO, that's not going to happen. But I do believe that an approximation, which would be a playable state, not the exact same state, but I think an approximation like that would be perfect. I have no issues with that whatsoever. I don't think personally, in terms of development, I don't think that any of this will be difficult. It might be time consuming, and it might require just a little bit more brain compute from the fucking from the low info people out there who just who don't want to think a little bit more forward than they need to. They stop when they see complexity. And they don't know how to unravel that. And the way to unravel that is just calm, steady, slow, and over time.
Yeah, I think admittedly too, when it comes down to that point, I think that's probably one of the best points, I think, where there's going to be a bit of friction when it comes to what exactly entails, functional playable state, because you're going to have that gray area where it's like, okay, well, this, it's not directly one-to-one, but that's going to mean something vastly different for an MMO. Like we even talked about, like the server binaries are setting up a separate API or setting up a separate server binary versus like an indie developer, doing something. They're going to have to focus on, adjusting that game in, a completely different genre in a way that still makes it playable. But it ends up being like, what's that threshold?
Yeah. Anybody questions or anything? Did not clarify something too much? Do I sound like an idiot?
No, you sound a lot smarter than most people that I think have covered this, including myself. Like a lot of this is really useful because I felt a bit sheepish going over some of these subjects, like when we get into server binaries, because it's just, I haven't, had the chutzpah to go ahead and figure out what that exactly means. So to have you break it down, kind of explain it, like API, for example, I hear the word all the time, but to break it down and make it understandable, that's incredibly useful, especially for a lot of people that, the general public that has no idea how difficult game development is.
Yeah, it is monumentally hard. But again, like I keep on saying at the same time, it's just planning makes a world of difference. Taking our time, planning, and understanding that, the big monster is nothing more than just nuts and bolts. Can we guys do more interviews, more YouTubers, so that info spreads to more and more people get informed? Maybe if people ask, sure. On my industry
some door knocking. Come on.
Yeah. So I do talk to other developers, and I'll link Quinn later, the industry devs, or just at industry devs here on YouTube. But we do speak to other developers and stuff like that too. We've had interviews with some OGs too. Sandy Peterson, he made the original Doom, Quake. We talked to Jonathan Blow, Braid, The Witness, that kind of thing. Jordan Lightheart, he worked on Wildstar, the MMO. And now he's an indie dev making his own stuff. We talked to a lot of other developers and stuff like that too, that I'm friends with. So guys, check that out too. Thumbs up and drop a coffee in all the comments.
Yeah, there you go. It's good to hear too that it's not just like, this isn't a one-off. There are other developers that are like, yeah, like this isn't, the end of the world to do this. As a matter of fact, like that's probably just going to be a consumer net positive. And it's nice to hear that from, how it's been made to look as it just being the direct opposition to something like this, as opposed to actually, no, because most game devs, are playing their fucking games. So, at the base level there, it kind of matters then as well. But yeah, I hope that the cut down video I do gets a bit of attention. I will just say here, like, it sounds like you're willing to. So if there's anyone, you know, that is also, you know, doing this stuff, wants to help support the Stop Killing Games initiative, feel free to reach out, and I'll put a pinned comment with your info. Fantastic. Well, I think that'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to have this conversation. Again,
Thanks
guys,
for having me.
I'll throw links in for it, but yeah, have a good evening. Take care of yourself.
You guys do the same. All right. Thanks again for having me out. Appreciate it. Peace.
Peace. That was fantastic. That was honestly even better than I was expecting. I mean, I didn't expect that we would actually be able to get through everything that we wanted to chat about, because he said he only had an hour. You know, I wanted to respect his time. He's very informative. Again, I'm not trying to make this seem like like I was telling him, I'm not trying to make this seem like a hating pirate software thing. I just think it was useful to address a lot of the arguments that he was putting forth, because, you know, having another game developer to, you know, combat those and actually provide legitimate ways that people could work around that, from indie developers to AAA, and more so finding out that AAA is just more like, we don't want to change. We're not interested in, you know, having to change things, spend money on different services, build out a different infrastructure. It's awesome. And it's glad to hear that, you know, there are legitimate, feasible ways to do this, and that's not coming from someone like me who's never touched game development in my life. It's coming from someone who knows what they're talking about. I think it really does come down to, yes, how we make games now. To apply the Stop Killing Games initiative in this exact moment would suck. And it's good that the Stop Killing Games initiative, described even by the creator of it, Ross, is not going to do that. This is something that is going to take potentially years to be implemented, but that's the expectation. That's how this should be going down. Hoping to do more interviews like this. It was a lot of fun.